What first drew you to the legal profession? And was it something that you really wanted to do? Was your passion, or did you get there somehow by mistake?
It's an interesting question. I did get there, it seemed maybe by mistake, but in the end, I got there to a place that I think I really belonged. I just didn't know it when I was growing up.
Hello, welcome back. This is Andreea Parc.
And Alexa Dumitru.
And this is Live Again podcast, where attorneys and other professionals meet to discuss real life challenges and how our decisions shaped our journeys. Today, we have the great pleasure of having our guest, Jane Goldman, who is one of the first women to rise to prominence in the entertainment law industry, at a time where very few women held such roles. Among her many accomplishments, she served as a general counsel for Time Warner, bringing her sharp legal insight and strategic leadership to one of the world's most influential media companies. Welcome, Jane. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
It's such a pleasure to hear that introduction. I think you could do the interview. Forget about asking me questions. That was great. Thank you.
Wow. I mean, you are one of the very first few women in the entertainment industry, and it's a great honor to have you talk about this.
Thank you. And I was lucky that the man who was a general counsel to Time Warner was one of the few believers in those days of hiring women. And he hired me, and I'll go into my story, for two positions that I had at the company. And that was after being rejected because of simply being the wrong sex for the job.
Wow.
But thank you. And I was general counsel VP of Warner Bros. Distributing Corporation, and not necessarily of Time Warner, although I like that title too. Thank you.
Yeah. That's definitely something. But let's start from the beginning. What first drew you to the legal profession? And was it something that you really wanted to do? Was your passion, or did you get there somehow by mistake?
It's an interesting question. I did get there, it seemed maybe by mistake, but in the end, I got there to a place that I think I really belonged. I just didn't know it when I was growing up. And I think that anybody who's listening to this, as I examine how I got there, should examine how they got to where they are, because sometimes it's not by a decision you make when you're a kid. You might have other thoughts, but what happens, it could be just meeting somebody and they change the direction of your life. And it could be a career, or it could be a husband, but it could be things that happen by inconsequential moments in your life, rejections even, that bring you to the place you belong. So for me, I should have wanted law as a profession. My grandfather was, my mother's father was, my father was, and the most shocking thing was that my mother was a lawyer, which was pretty impressive in her day. There were only 3 women in her class at NYU Law School. But despite that, I really had no interest in law. In fact, I think my father wanted me to be more a doctor, because then I would always see him with lots of papers on the desk, so I was not interested. And as a kid, my interest was in creative things. I played the piano, and I was accepted at performing arts. So I thought music might be my path. But then I got into performing arts, playing Chopin waltzes. Other people got in by Rachmaninoff piano concertos. So I thought, that's not for me. Then in college, I thought maybe I would go for medical degree and take the classes. I started in physics, I was an outstanding student in high school in physics, but not at Barnard. In fact, it was the one time, I have to admit to cheating, I took my take-home exam to somebody who knew what they was talking about. And from that point on, I stopped science and then moved into sociology, and actually still was thinking to maybe be a sociologist or psychologist. But when I graduated at Barnard, I applied to Columbia School of Social Work, where most Barnard girls tried to get into, and I was not on top of my class. I was rejected. So I got a job, but that rejection turned out to lead me to the right path. On the other hand, maybe I wouldn't have had to work so hard in my life, but whatever. But I then got a job with the Bureau of Child Welfare, working as a caseworker and ultimately a supervisor with foster care children. So it was my day job. The last minute, though, I liked school, and I thought, I should go for something. And then NYU Law School had an evening division then. and I applied at the last minute, took the LSATs at the last minute. And it was at the last minute, a Friday night, that I found out that I was accepted. And I said, if I don't like it, can I get my money back? Because you didn't pay what you pay now. And they said, yes, you have 2 weeks. So I continued my job, and I went, and I then spent 4 years at night working in the Bureau of Child Welfare during the day as a caseworker, then supervisor. I look back and wonder really how I did that. But in the end, that got me into the law. The thing that was interesting to me, though, by this story is that when I found my autograph book from 5th grade, I saw in there, what did I want to do when I grew up? Which I still sometimes wonder about if I ever grow up. But it is, I said, an actress, a writer, or a lawyer. So I think in the end, I wound up where I should have been. I just didn't know it. Different things happened along my journey that got me there. And then I can tell you, if you want, about the story at Warner, how I got there, because that was not at first my first job. So,
But I remember when I was talking to you that you were an attorney of the entertainment industry in California. How did you get there?
well, that's another kind of a story. I had first, I'll tell you, because being accepted anywhere as a woman in those days was very hard. I remember when I tried to get to Warner at the beginning of my career, they rejected me, as they were most women at that point. And then I even went to a law firm, and the man there, the partner, said, we had to hire a man instead of a woman with your qualifications because you'll get married and have children. And I said, of course I understand that. This man, of course, could never say that now, would be sued, etc. But then I totally understood. In the end, though, I was hired because I was a woman by a lawyer who was specializing in matrimonial cases, and he wanted a woman associate to be with his clients. So I did that. And then after that, still, I worked for him for a year. When he asked to borrow money from me, I thought I'd better go out on my own. So I did. And I started my own law practice, divorce work. Men did not want to come to me as a woman lawyer. So I had a lot of women clients who I really cared about, except that they didn't have much money. They were waiting for the husband to pay the legal fees. So then I wound up thinking, and I was on panels for indigent defendants, for foster care kids, but I was finding myself being somewhat indigent myself. So I applied for a temporary job at Warner doing a document production, and I was accepted. I did my practice, and I had a full day as going through documents for an antitrust case. Then I happened to be on the floor at the legal department at what was then Warner Communications when the head counsel saw me, the man I mentioned who was open to hiring women. And he needed somebody to assist a woman who headed the motion picture distribution legal department. And he saw me and invited me to lunch. I never expected at that moment. This was a great week in my life. He offered me a job at this major company. Two men said they loved me, and the blood bank called me to ask for my blood. They thought it was unusual. So that was probably my best day. So I accepted the job, and that began my career at Warner. I worked under this woman, which was rather challenging, because she was not so easy, but I stayed there for a number of years. And when she decided to retire was the moment and this was motion picture distribution work, where we dealt with theaters and distribution of our movies, mostly antitrust cases where people where independents would say we gave our films to the circuits as opposed to them. So we had hundreds of those lawsuits and other things. But when she was ready to retire for the very first time, she talked about what a great lawyer I was. I hadn't heard that in 8 years. But now she was ready to turn over the reins to me. And I was ready to accept it, to be made a VP and general counsel of the motion picture distributing company. That was very exciting until they told me that meant that I had exciting to me. One, I love New York. And two is I had lived all my life in New York, only went to school in New York, and I didn't have a driver's license. And the last thing I wanted to do was drive. So I asked for a driver. It wasn't that important to the company. So they gave me driving lessons. So I did that. I drove, and not good. I still have a license. God forbid I never drive again. But I haven't driven in 20 years. That's another story, another program. Should figure out who gets driver's licenses. But I stayed there for about 4 years as I had to come from New York. We were 2 lawyers and 3 or 4 paralegals. When I got the position to move to LA, it was just me. And we had a trial going on and lots of things. And I had to build a staff. Exciting one, now running the department and not having to be under a woman who was very difficult. And then, but I did that for about 4 years. And then I wanted to come back to New York. My mother was sick. And I happened to be back in New York on a business trip when they were looking for somebody to also work on overseeing the litigation at Time Warner. And that's when the general counsel, I asked him, it was the right moment, and he said, you can do it. And that was wonderful because I could come back. The only not wonderful thing was that I had no idea about how to handle the legal matters that I'd now be responsible for, because I was an expert in motion picture work, but not in class actions and copyright, in book problems. And we oversaw litigation for Time Warner and for the different divisions that their litigation would have a material effect on the company. The last thing I'll say, though, is in those days there was no internet, but I was going out with a man who was my internet. Somebody would call me with a problem. I'd say, one moment, please, Stanley, what is the copyright law about? But in a year, I got up to speed and then spent the balance of my career on that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So now I want to ask you, what were your biggest challenges in your career?
Well, I think, and I in part answered that, the biggest challenges were getting the job, that first job, and being rejected by the law firm. And then each step after that was a challenge. Working under this woman was a challenge. I think that was very hard. Moving to LA, having to start a whole department, getting used to a whole lifestyle. And we dealt with a male sales force. One thing, they got used to working with the woman who was my predecessor. Now they had to work with me, and having this like that, that was very challenging. Being able to stand up to top of the entertainment industry about things that I didn't think were right, and having them listen to what I had to say. I'm not that type of a person in my normal life. But as a lawyer, I was very dedicated to making sure people walk the straight line. That's an important thing. So that was very challenging. And it was challenging in LA, and it was very challenging coming back to New York, being thought as an expert lawyer, but I was now handling matters that is part of the law, what I needed to do as a lawyer. So that was very challenging. And then, of course, it was challenging when I decided to stop working and then find a life for myself. And I don't know if other people that hear this, when you go, it could be not even a career. It could be from being a mother or a wife. Suddenly you're on your own. Or I came with lots of titles and a big salary. I was even impressed.
Yeah.
And now I didn't have that. When I had my titles, I didn't have to read the newspaper. People automatically assumed I was very smart. But after that, I really needed to read. I mean, now who was I? And I had to find my value.
Yes, definitely. Actually, that was my next question. When you retired and you stepped away from your roles and titles and high profile job and high salary, how did you feel emotionally, and how were you able to find who you are after that?
At first, it was going to be a little bit scary, but I do have to say the first week, actually after my last day, I had a trip to California for a wedding, and it was wonderful to not have to be tied to the phone. And those were days of no cell phones. They used to talk about me as being able to find every standing phone anywhere, because that was my life. That's why I hate the phones now, I think. But it was at first, so that was a good beginning, but still it was a sense of my self-worth. But what I did was pretty much immediately, I started going to childhood passions. I took a drawing course that led me into learning to paint, which had not been a passion. I went back to sculpting, to piano playing, and to writing. I was as busy with my classes as I was at Time Warner. And I began to think it didn't matter what other people thought. I was now doing what really was meaningful to me. And although it was still a little difficult, because it was me without titles. And, if I wasn't up on knowing who the best author was at that moment, things were different. But then I was very satisfied with the things that I did. And then different things some of my interest led me into other things. Like I never did like painting. And then I found that I liked it. Well, I think, and the one interesting thing too I found is that, you begin to wonder, what is your self-worth? If you're, I mean, I'm not going to have my paintings in an art gallery, or I did write a book, so some people read that and I can talk about that. But I thought about how hard I worked at my company, hours and weekends and no vacations for years and drop of the hat going on a plane. And my company doesn't exist anymore. Time Warner is no longer Time Warner. And so putting all that effort, happily, they didn't fall apart because of me. I did do a good job, so that was good. But so I think that what doesn't matter if my painting is not in a gallery. And the thing is that I find now that I have more time for things that are important to me, the people that I love, my family, my friends, and then to be able to give myself leeway and permission to do the other things that I love. And the creative area, I think we all have creativity inside of us, and I think it just sometimes needs to be pulled out by something, just by trying it. So that was that's where I began to feel my self-worth, but by also being happy with how I was spending my time. And when you're working very hard, sometimes you might have a lot of self-worth, but you may not have a lot of time to do what you want.
Definitely. And you have this capacity of bringing people together. And we mentioned your name in so many episodes because I met you through the Three Tomatoes Publishing Company. And we mentioned your name at our episode with Cheryl Benton when she explained how she would meet with you Sundays with Jane. And turns out that you wrote your book and she has now this great publishing company.
Right,
And
right.
then we spoke about you with Steve, where you bring together musicians in your house. And it's wonderful how you bring together and you have this capacity to have people together. And also, I have to mention that I visited your exhibit last year and it was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
your talent is amazing. I mean, I graduated fine arts high school and I wanted to be an artist, and I don't think that I have your talent. I mean, you are incredible. So please tell us more about your book.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you about the talent. I would like to see your art. I am sure I didn't go to fine art school, but in things, it's just probably you don't have the time doing all these wonderful things with your programs to do art. Um, and even if work is not wonderful, and I thank you for saying what you do, just the process of being involved in it. And I love doing portraits, finding people's, finding what makes somebody look like themselves. But in writing, I took a writing class immediately after I stopped working. I had written a lot as a lawyer, excuse me, mostly editing briefs, not necessarily having to do it because we hired lawyers to do our litigation. I edited their briefs, but I hadn't really done any creative writing. And soon after I stopped working, I took a writing class at the New School. I'm still friendly with the writing teacher. We still meet. And I wrote a bunch of pieces, and I didn't even know. And again, I'll tell the viewers, sometimes you don't even know that you have things to write. But now that I was in a class and she gave some prompt, all of a sudden began to be a prompt to write. So I wrote a lot of pieces. And then through my friend Randy Levine, I got to meet Cheryl, had a magazine. And I thought, well, maybe I'll put some of these pieces to her. And then Cheryl thought, I've been wanting to be a publisher. Would we maybe do the first author? And I thought, great. And at that point, I hadn't written for a few years. I got out of it because I just wasn't doing it. As soon as she said that, and I needed to write more pieces, everything again began to be a story. One night, for example, a man said, "You look beautiful." And then that night I wrote a whole piece about what is being beautiful. I mean, it was like I'd go out, I'd see the traffic lights, and I'd think, traffic lights, and I'd have a story. So it was being stimulated by writing that I got to put this book together. I called it, which is a title that I sometimes question it, is called With No Regrets, Getting Older, Face It, live it, love it. The book is about a lot of my stories were dealing with and now I wrote a lot of that when I was a lot younger. I wrote a piece then about looking in the mirror and not recognizing myself. And that I wrote probably 20 years ago. So now I look in the mirror and now I really believe that article. I don't recognize myself, but it was still, but I wrote about, that. And my book is about a lot of other life stories for love relationships, how you feel when you don't have a position, how you feel about getting older, what is important. I lost my sister. She was 64, and I have a piece about that, appreciating everything she did. So when she got to the end, she said, I did what I needed to do. I did my life the way I wanted to do. I saw every city I wanted to see. And it's a reminder to me, that getting older is something that we're grateful for. Although I was thinking of writing an article that talks about changing the title, saying face it, live it, love it. But Cheryl had this wonderful party for a lot of us for birthday parties and all of us getting older. And it was really a celebration of aging. And sometimes as you age, you have the ability to do more things that are more meaningful to you. So it is a book. I happen to have it here in front of me, but the whole process, I think, for me, putting aside whether people buy it or not, it was so stimulating me to write more. In fact, I think I better write another book because I haven't been writing much since then. But it's a wonderful outlet, and I was glad that some people actually decided to buy it and even liked it. But
Yeah.
that was a good thing. But that would have never happened if I was still working, or it would never have happened if I thought these things were not valuable like work was. I mean, everything has value and it's different times of your life. And you just have to also make sure that you put value on it, even if other people don't.
And finding purpose in everything that we do
Right. Yes. That's not,
in
and
life.
meaning, right. And I'm very happy with I haven't been playing the piano lately, but I know a lot of talented people like Steve Jacqueline and Jim Brochu, Mark Janis. And I wound up getting an apartment that wound up being by accident very good for having music salons. And I like to be able to not only give them a platform for playing, but to share it with my friends because there's something about music that really is so good for the soul. And when they play and Steve composes his own music, lyrics that are far better than anything you hear these days. In fact, I worry about children growing up with the terrible language in pieces, and he has his music, but I do very much enjoy that. It was one of the best reasons for me to have moved, to be able to have those music salons. My other apartment is maybe better for my living, but it wasn't good for music salons.
Looking back at your life, would you have done anything differently?
Would I have done anything different? I haven't thought of that. Well, sometimes I do have a regret of working maybe too hard. That's why if you have any people who are looking to start careers, I do think should make a decision of how much time you want to put into work and things like that. I have, it's a very important question.
Right.
I think
Because your book is called With No Regrets, so it
yes.
means that you
My
have no regrets.
Well, that was another part of the title that was something that I might reconsider for my next book. My regret is having a title saying with no regrets. No, I'm kidding. No, it is because the thing is that you do learn from different things. And if I do regret maybe spending too much of my young years working so hard, like going to law school at night and working during the day, which I didn't have to do. My parents were very happy to send me full time. I just didn't want them to have to spend the money then. And I did enjoy my work. I think everything that you do brings you something, even if later on, you could think, well, maybe if I didn't work that hard or something like that. But I think on the whole, everything led me to this moment and I'm grateful for where I am right now. But to people who are coming up as lawyers, particularly, it would be an important thing to know when you choose your field and specialty that you also decide about how many hours that will take from your day. Litigation can take 24 hours, 7 days a week. Estate work might not. So you might have a passion for something, but maybe you want to make sure that you don't give up something for it, or what you give up is worth the giving up. So, but I will think more about your question. And then in another 4 years, you can talk to me. I regret that I haven't thought about that too much. But anyhow, I'm grateful for where I am and grateful that you chose me as one of, I think your program is so inspirational to all women.
And funny
Thank you.
enough, that's why I didn't choose to be a lawyer.
Is
Because
that
of
right?
all the paperwork and all the work and school and
I know. And I do think that my father, the reason he wasn't pushing me to become a lawyer, I think was because of all the paperwork and things. On the other hand, for me, since I'm a worrier, as my friends know very well, as a lawyer, I always worry and always made sure everything was right. If I had become a doctor, as I physics that first year, I could imagine somebody would come in with a cough and I'd be ready to send them for a chest x-ray. So, and as a lawyer, I mean, you can't kill anybody by a bad judgment as a lawyer, but as a doctor, everything could be on the line. But I did take the law in my working as if somebody would die if I did that, and I made sure that I was doing it as good as possible.
So you had such a long practice and activity and roles in law. What advice would you give young attorneys? And you mentioned having boundaries as to how many hours, but there is anything else that you would think about to give advice?
And again, as to me, I mean, my working so hard, I don't really have regrets because it did move me into positions that were very stimulating and interesting. And I was given the wonderful opportunities of meeting the heads of industry and entertainment and at Time Warner. And that was very satisfying. You can't get it all, but I do think I didn't think about hours when I made my decision to join Time Warner. But I think that it's for a new lawyer, figure what your passion is in terms of what area of the law is most interesting, and then figure out what kind of hours might be involved in that. Litigation, as I said earlier, can be your whole life, more than a normal work life. Being an estate lawyer might not be. So that's an important thing. I think it's important to connect with people who are in your field, to learn from people, to join professional organizations, the bar associations. They're fascinating programs. It's not just about moving you along. It's good to make sure that you ask for fair compensation. Make sure that you let people know the good work that you're doing. That's an important thing. Make sure that nobody is trying to put you down because you're a woman or because they are a woman and they don't want you to be taking over their role. So be very wary of all those things. But I think the biggest thing for me to tell somebody is make sure that you have the right boundaries. Well, make sure that you don't lose your friends, have your support systems. You can journal and all that, and make sure that you're kind to yourself and forgiving if something goes wrong. I'm very hard on myself. Sometimes people, all of that. And also, if you make one step and it's not right, sometimes you know it soon. Go and do something else. I know the field is much more open to women now than it ever has. The law firms are taking more associates of women. Law schools, I think 55% now are women. And judges and professors are more women. In fact, soon there'll be a program for men about how to deal with women taking over the field, as they are in many, many different ways. But that's some of the advice. And if anybody is online and wants more personal advice, you can give them my number. I'll be very happy to mentor and talk to anybody who is interested.
As we are approaching the end, there is a question that I ask every guest. What is one activity in your life that makes you feel more alive?
Um, that's very hard. I mean, I guess being with people that I love, but then also following, you said just one, following my passions. When I sit with a paintbrush and try to get somebody's face in front of me, it's going to another place. And I do that with all my creative interests. So that doesn't quite answer your question specifically, but that does make me feel alive. And I think that's a very important thing. Sometimes I can go weeks without reminding myself to make time for things. I think that's a very important thing for everybody who listens to ask themselves, and then to make sure that every day or 3 times a week, you make sure that you put down time for those things that make you feel alive, because life and the activities of life and the distractions can distract you. And then all of a sudden you're weary and it's harder to become alive. So I'm glad I have these things that I know will always make me feel alive. Being on your program is making me feel alive, talking about these things. And I think it's good for everybody to reflect on their path, how they got from beginning to where it is now.
Yeah, definitely. part of what we do also is the constructive escape movement, and we have people finding ways to escape into their own selves, exactly what you said when you're there painting, because so many people in this day and age with stress and pressures, and especially in the legal profession,
Right.
finding that inner peace by doing something that we love, it's very, very important. So thank
And
you for
it's,
mentioning that.
and I just would say it's interesting that you use the word escape to it. I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to put on so many different veneers to manage our life and to go about and to deal as we do in the world, and that we have to, quote, escape to really being ourselves. But I think that is when we do come alive, when we escape. And maybe at some point we won't have to be escaping. We can just be out there, proud of what to other people might seem like a waste of time, but to us. In fact, I have a piece in my book about a waste of time. What is a waste of time? And the only waste of time there is thinking that anything that you love is a waste of time. I think that's how I ended that piece.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing about
Yeah.
escaping.
I love drinking tea, and I bought some teas that on the tag they have all kinds of inspirational lines, and one of them was, if you enjoy wasting time, is not wasted time, is
Right, right,
enjoyed time.
right. I wonder how I didn't quite say that. I'm sorry that I didn't know that in writing my piece about wasting time, but because I came to the same conclusion that, let's see, waste, I don't think I'll have as good an ending, but that is a very,
I'll send you a picture of the tag because I still have it. I loved it so much. I took a picture of it.
yeah. But my last line in this piece, waste, by the way, my grandniece did all the drawings in it in my book. But my last line said, so maybe nothing is, quote, a waste of time other than the thought that anything one cares about, even if it doesn't last, is a, quote, waste of time. So that's a little bit like what you were just saying. Yes, agreed.
Well, thank you so much. We will link in the description of the episode your information and your book for people to get it. And it was such a wonderful pleasure to have you on and have this conversation with you. Thank you very much for being here with us.
And I thank you so much for your program and for thinking that I would be one of your subjects to be interviewed. So thank you both.